Resident Evil Requiem is a good game. Well, it might be more accurate to say that it's two good games cut in half and stitched together. When you play as Grace, it's classic survival horror with some hide-and-seek parts sprinkled in. A lot of modern horror games tend to just be bad stealth games or walking simulators, but Requiem mostly beats the allegations there. There's a couple parts where you're just hiding from the monster and waiting until you're allowed to progress, but those moments are few and far between. If you aren't actually getting scared, most horror games have nothing to offer since the actual gameplay tends to mostly just be moving between hiding spots and waiting. But the horror elements here in Requiem are really just icing. Fear or no fear, there's something to chew on. Grace's gameplay is about resource management and knowing what fights to take and which to avoid. Her main chunk of the game takes place in the Rhodes Hill Care Center, a vaguely medical building with a game room and a cathedral on the premises. Pretty standard for Resident Evil. The building itself is a very familiar layout with a 2-floor east and west wing setup. I can mentally visualize and walk through every inch of the place. It's that memorable. It's large, but it's not to the point that it's annoying to trek from one end to the other. Like a lot of things in this game, they struck a really nice balance here. The care center feels like a place. It doesn't feel like a video game level. That's not to say that the care center itself is realistic. It has a lot of contrived nonsense that Resident Evil is basically famous for at this point, but that's not really what I'm getting at. A lot of games will despawn bodies, spawn new enemies out of thin air constantly, and just generally make the areas feel more like combat arenas than places. This game respects the care center's sense of place. The enemies you fight are just people who happen to be there, and there's not an infinite number of them. Every zombie you kill was a person, and every body you destroy is another room made permanently safer. There are a couple times when new enemies pop up in older areas, but they're entirely believable, and they're the exception rather than the rule. A lot of the areas here are relatively normal looking and brightly lit. Unless hospitals really creep you out, I don't think the majority of environments here are particularly scary. The ones featuring the light-sensitive monster girl, though, are obvious exceptions. This half of the game also has this really nice grounded quality to it because the enemies don't really just spawn out of nowhere, and bodies from zombies you've killed stick around long after you've killed them too. You're reminded of the fight you had every single time you walk past one, and they'll even occasionally get back up as an extra scary blisterhead. Choosing whether to kill a zombie or avoid it is made more interesting by the added wrinkle that blisterheads and their counter represent. The hemolytic injectors let you instantly explode a zombie and prevent their blisterification. This added dimension makes weighing the resource costs involved in dealing with a single zombie exponentially more interesting. It's these kinds of decisions that make survival horror games compelling. Another reason this part of the game works so well is because the threats here feel very finite. It makes Grace's gameplay feel like it's taking place on a much smaller scale compared to Leon's. Leon is carving a path through an abandoned city full of zombies. Grace is fighting for her life just trying to get out of one building. Grace's combat is pretty simple, especially compared to Leon's, but it's engaging simply because missing a shot or getting detected matters a lot more when ammo is scarce and you're as weak as Grace is. Don't get me wrong, you can kill pretty much everything on the normal difficulties, and even on Insanity you can kill almost everything you would reasonably want to bother with, but it's not always worth it from a time or resources perspective. Speaking of those difficulties, let's talk about that classic mode. So there's two options for the normal difficulty mode, and the only difference from everything I can tell is that in classic mode, Grace requires an ink ribbon to be able to save, and autosaves in her parts of the game are few and far between. I have a whole video planned about this kind of thing in games, but suffice it to say, I'm not a huge fan of this mechanic. There is a minor element of crafting more ink ribbons being a small resource sink, but honestly, the amount of ink ribbons I crafted throughout the whole game could be counted on one hand, so its effect on my item economy was overall pretty negligible. There's also the fact that ink ribbons and the empty ink ribbon tins are themselves items, so naturally they take up space in your very limited inventory. That's probably the biggest way that it ends up changing your gameplay, but again, it's a pretty small change. So the big question is, how does limiting saves like this affect the gameplay itself? Why is it a good thing? Well, there is a small benefit. It does create some tension when you know that you haven't saved in a while, but that tension is only there because of the threat of wasted time hanging above your head. So long as you're not saving constantly, which isn't really desirable anyway because backtracking to the typewriter takes some time, you're not likely to ever want to save without an ink ribbon already at hand to do so. The game is balanced in such a way that you would be perfectly fine saving almost every time you naturally pass by a safe room. So at best, it's really a non-factor, and at worst, it just preys on people's instincts to optimize. Since saving isn't free, it costs a pretty limited resource, remember? you have some incentive to try to go without saving for longer stretches of time. And if you overextend and die, all that really means is that you wasted some of your time, and it probably gives you an opportunity to be even more efficient with how you approach the encounters that you now have to do over again, which ultimately just makes the game easier and not harder. The only thing limiting saves this way really accomplishes is adding a little bit more tension and wasting a little bit more of your time. Ink ribbons don't really make the game more difficult, it just makes it take a little bit longer to recover from failure. Now, when you play on Insanity difficulty, the tougher enemies make the ink ribbons feel a little bit scarcer due to the increased resource strain involved in killing a tougher monster, and the high amount of threat each zombie poses creates situations where you want to save more often. So that makes sense to include for this difficulty. I don't love this mechanic, but I can see why it's in the game. It's traditional for the series, and it's not completely without merit. It just has a different list of pros and cons. So all that said, I think my recommendation would just be to play the normal mode first without the ink ribbons. It's annoying at worst, and the benefits of the system don't really end up materializing when the game is that easy anyway. Insanity mode doesn't make the time-wasty negative aspects of the system go away, but the game is hard enough there that you can start to justify the added annoyance for the added tension and strain on your economy. All of this is also just ignoring the fact that if you really wanted to, you could just save your Insanity run for last and spend all your points on infinite ammo, ribbons, and other stuff to make Grace's section a lot easier anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. So now we get to Leon. Leon's game is pretty fun. He's the embodiment of the action-centered part of the series. He gets a lot more guns than Grace, and his inventory is less limited and actually works like how it did in Resident Evil 4 as well, which is a nice touch. He also gets the parry from the RE4 remake in this game, and it is exactly as cool as you would think. You can parry almost anything, and it always feels good. You can! You fucking can! But his combat does feel a touch lacking somehow. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what's missing. Maybe it's the lack of enemy variety, since outside of boss fights, there's really only zombies with guns, and scarier zombies. There's an exception that illustrates my point though. You do get to fight lickers and human soldiers for like 10 minutes towards the end of the game, and that is a massive injection of interest when it would otherwise start to really drag. I do wish there were more enemies like that just sprinkled throughout the game. There really just isn't a lot of anything in this game, to be honest. Sometimes that's really nice. Even in Grace's section, you only encounter each variant of zombie twice. But that works because there's enough variety within the lineup to keep everything feeling fresh, and nothing gets reused often enough to be annoying. Leon feels a little famished for enemy variety. It feels like most of his budget went towards the actual encounter design and set pieces, which, don't get me wrong, are reliably cool, and they almost make up for the fact that you fight largely the same enemies for 4 hours. It could also be the limited weapon variety. Outside of the special guns that you only get on New Game Plus, there's only 2, rarely 3 different guns of each type, and the upgrades are definitely impactful, but they're not terribly exciting either. There's weapon charms, which do unique and interesting things, but there's only one generic charm that increases damage and one other charm specific to each weapon type. So each gun gets a whopping 2 options for charms. Maybe it's the stiff movement, I don't know, it's hard to say. It feels like an incredibly pared back game, especially in Leon's part. I'm a believer in the whole less is more thing, but some of these things don't feel like they were fully fleshed out. I would take this over a bloated open world grindfest any day of the week, but this game definitely would have benefited from a modest expansion of a few key systems. I'd be remiss not to mention that the game has first and third person modes available for both characters, which is interesting. They default to and recommend first person for Grace and third person for Leon. Having tried both for both characters, I actually agree with their suggestion here. When it comes to Grace, the first person perspective is more immersive and it just works better for horror. Adding to this, the first person camera is limited to a claustrophobically narrow FOV with no FOV slider in the settings. I can't help but think that's actually an intentional decision, and I know what you're gonna say, but I do think it's the right decision. Hear me out. If given the option, everybody, myself included, would crank that FOV all the way up, at the detriment of that constant sense of paranoia and frantic head turning. If you can only see a narrow slice in front of you, that is going to add to the tension, that is going to add to the fear, that is going to add to the horror. It's just better that way. Yeah, it's uncomfortable having a low FOV. I agree, in like 90% of games, that's undesirable. But here, that's the whole point. You don't even need the higher FOV for Grace. You'll probably get over it, honestly. You think you won't, but you will. You'll get over it after like an hour like I did. If you have some extreme motion sickness, edge case, accessibility thing or whatever, you can always just play Grace in third person. And despite it being, in my opinion at least, a slightly compromised experience, you are able to see Grace emote and react to stuff, which is a cool detail. As for Leon, that narrow FOV in first person does make it a genuine non-starter. With all the action going on in his gameplay, it just does not make any sense whatsoever. The camera constantly pulls out to third person anyway whenever you do basically any kind of finisher or kick, so it doesn't even matter. Just play in third person. Now, story-wise, there's not much to complain about until probably the very end. Grace herself is a new character, and she's awkward, jumpy, anxious, unsure of herself, and deeply traumatized. This will probably make her very relatable to a lot of people.
I can't. There's too much. Come on, Grace.
It also makes her quite well suited for the more horror-focused part of the campaign she gets. Her voice actress does a great job too.
No! Mom! Mom!
She does commit, at the very beginning of the game, a very horror movie-esque sin. After getting attacked, bitten, and then having barely killed the guy attacking her, the police officer, instead of literally just leaving or going back to grab her gun first, like anybody would, she hears the creepy music upstairs and then decides to go check it out while she's like literally bleeding and does not have her gun? Like, what? Make it make sense.
Is anyone there?
That's how she gets kidnapped. Shocker, play stupid games, I guess, win stupid prizes. That's probably the dumbest thing that she ends up doing though. Well, except trying to give CPR to somebody dying of blood loss, but we can chalk that one up to like desperation and shock, because I'm pretty sure a bunch of people would do the exact same thing, but put a pin in that for now. Outside of those moments, she's actually pretty clever. She figures out how to get out of her restraints, and there's also that scene where she's running from Victor and she opens the door and then doubles back to hide in the room so that he thinks she left. She thinks to threaten Zeno not by aiming the gun at him, but by aiming it at herself because he actually still needs her to be alive. And she's like the only person in the entire fucking world that managed to figure out that Elpis was an antiviral. I will say though, her not being able to tell which Braille words are sun, moon, and star is pretty fucking dumb. I mean, the Braille translation is literally on the other two machines. You don't even have to like analyze the dot patterns and realize like, oh yeah, this one must be moon. It literally tells you which one is which on the other two machines that she definitely had seen by this point. So if she cares about Emily, she's endangering her for no reason. If she doesn't care about Emily and she's just dumb, then she's endangering herself at this point, because the guy who literally died in front of Emily's fucking containment cell is like, don't fucking open that, get away. The only explanation that really makes sense here is that Grace is just a little stupid sometimes. And sure, yeah, all right, fair enough. Obviously, they want Grace and Emily to bond a little bit before she gets kidnapped, so that's why it's like this. I do like, though, that at no point does Grace give any indication that she's doing this for any reason other than saving Emily, despite the fact that she kind of has to do it to get the quartz that Emily was holding when she got kidnapped. She doesn't even think of it. Emily's like, oh, I held this for you, I kept it safe the whole time, and she's like, oh yeah, that thing, thanks. But yeah, Grace obviously cares about Emily a lot, and after the 30-second helicopter ride that she gets, Emily gets a mystery injury that has her bleeding out, despite nothing seemingly hitting her or stabbing her or anything. She just starts bleeding after the helicopter crashes. I really don't want to be that guy, but like, why didn't you use a med injector on her? Like, it's not even a non-canon video game thing. Leon literally uses a med injector in a cutscene after Victor cuts his throat in the cutscene. So like, Why didn't they med inject her? A throwaway line like, oh yeah, she's just a kid, the meds are too strong, they'll kill her. Like, that would have at least helped me suspend my disbelief a little bit more. There's also, of course, lest we forget, Emily's transformation. Genuinely a terrible situation, and I love how they handled that scene.
Hi, it's me. I'm right here. You okay? You okay?
Sorry.
Are you that's Emily? No, Emily. I wanted to save her.
You don't understand.
No, I never would have escaped without her. This is all my fault. Again.
Look, I get it. Trust me, I get it. But we're still alive. We have to keep going.
No.
It's fucking horrifying, and you can definitely see, at least in part, why Grace is being so irrational here. I really liked how they did this moment. Leon does the right thing, like he always does, but Grace is fucking pissed. Grace sees him as having just killed Emily. So I thought to myself, oh shit, this is how Grace gets radicalized. This is cool as hell. This is fucking S tier setup, honestly, but we get D tier payoff. Grace doesn't even seem to hold any kind of grudge against Leon for this afterwards, despite literally getting upset with him and leaving with the bad guys earlier. And they undercut the entire thing at the end by having this cowardly line.
I wish we could have saved Emily.
Grace, I didn't hit any of her vitals. She could still be alive.
What are you saying?
Maybe we can save her.
The fuck you mean you didn't hit her vitals? She turned into a monster and you're saying you shot her until she fell unconscious, but without killing her? Leon, how did you know that she was actually just a regular human trapped in a monster flesh suit when that's not how literally any of the other monsters have ever worked? Also, why didn't you say that after you shot her and Grace got mad at you? Also, is she just not bleeding out anymore? Because like the whole reason this whole thing happened is because she was bleeding out. So did the flesh suit viral transformation that isn't a transformation also heal her wound? Dude, I'm telling you, generational fumble. They wanted to have the cake of Emily dying and eat it too, with the happy ending of Grace rescuing her and getting a daughter. Either one would have been fine. Honestly, I don't care which one you pick. But this is genuinely spineless. Either kill the fucking girl or don't. You don't get to just watch her turn into a monster, have Leon light her fucking up, and expect people to smile and nod when you pretend like that was a recoverable fucking thing, when the whole reason that scene works is because it's so clearly unrecoverable. Outside of that, a load-bearing qualifier, if there ever was one, I enjoyed the story. I do think it's hilarious that Zeno and Victor were literally just confidently incorrect about everything. They made a bunch of massive assumptions that they never challenged about what Elpis even is and who Grace even was. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a viral superweapon, I guess. But I mean, who could have really predicted that this would be the one time that Umbrella actually made a good thing? The Leon situation kinda disappointed me though. though. The writing on the wall was that they were gonna kill Leon. I mean, there is that alternate ending where you destroy Elpis and everybody dies except for Grace, which is pretty funny. I'm not saying they definitely should have killed Leon, but I was definitely ready for it. Dude looks like death, and he is coughing up blood the whole fucking game.
Are you okay?
Me? I feel like $1 million.
In hindsight, yeah, how likely is it that they would have killed everybody's favorite character? But before you know that they cheated on Emily's death, she dies, the helicopter pilot dies, Grace's mom dies, the nice nurse from the beginning dies, the cop dies, the hotel manager dies. Literally every person that you see that isn't Leon and Grace dies. And if you were ever gonna kill Leon, this was the game to do it. All the callbacks and fan service give the impression that they're trying to tie up Leon's story in a nice little bow. That kind of thing can be pretty grating when it's just a bunch of like, hey, remember this thing? It exists. But in this case, I do think it ends up feeling mostly pretty earned and not too out of place. You go back to the ruins of RPD from Resident Evil 2 and they keep it pretty brief and tasteful. The Tyrant gets his moment to do the busting through the wall thing one last time, and then he just fucks off so that you two can fight outside. It's kind of funny.
Fuck me.
There's an irony that the first half of the game is focused on new characters and new locations and a new perspective with gameplay inspired by the original games, while the latter half is focused on old characters and old locations and a slightly more traditional perspective with gameplay inspired by the later entries, barring 7, I guess. It's pretty smart how both halves of the game are a cocktail of the old and new. Speaking of, Zeno is an interesting character because when I first saw him, I was really confused because he's literally just a not Wesker. He's even voiced by the same guy. The closest we get to any explanation is when Victor calls him an imitation, so I guess that means he's either a clone or he just got the same juice that Wesker got. Canonically, just a less cool version of Wesker. He does have it on though. As a Wesker enjoyer myself, Zeno's scenes are okay, but he does feel very held back by the writers when it comes to his encounters with Leon. The first time they meet, Zeno acts like he's just too busy and sicks the Tyrant on him. The second time, Leon is noticeably sicker and they get a little proper spat. This is very much a hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby situation, and the only reason Zeno doesn't delete him instantaneously like he did with the BSAA soldiers is because the writers just don't want Leon to die here. The fight choreography is kinda cool, but its execution just isn't convincing. Without changing almost anything about it, you could have just had Grace yell out to spare Leon earlier, and I think that awkward feeling mostly would have went away if you did it right. While we're being an armchair game dev, I also just can't shake the thought that the orphanage section should have been the game's opening. Obviously, it would have worked as a tutorial for movement and hiding and such, but it also means that when you find Emily, you think, oh, Emily, that's the girl I played in the beginning. And then you find out later, like, no, actually the girl you played in the beginning is Grace, and then you get a reveal out of it. That's a little bit more interesting than just knowing it was Grace the whole time. Our other antagonist is Victor. Victor's actor is channeling his best Heath Ledger Joker. The lip licking, the vocal cadence, the scars, it's definitely there.
Dr. Victor Gideon. I run this center. It took forever to find you. You're not like other people, you know. You're quite unique. Through you, Elpis can finally be set free.
Why me?
Because my master made you who you are. Phase 2's about to begin.
I'd say he overall works as a performance, but he's just not really around enough, so that makes his impact on the game fall a little short. It's funny, but the light-sensitive giant monster girl felt a little bit more compelling as a villain compared to Victor. His motivations are a little weird too. He works for Zeno, doing a bunch of research, grinding up zombies into blood for reasons. Maybe I'm just missing something, but it felt to me the whole point of everything was to find Grace, or at the very least create a copy of Grace so that they could access Elpis. But what's got me really confused is how any of that would even help. The password prompt is asking, what does the creator desire? How would Grace or even a perfect clone of Grace magically know that answer? You literally just have to have known the guy. Grace doesn't even know the password herself until she watches a fucking interview. Zeno and Victor's brains are just fucking mush. They're by far the dumbest people in the game, and it's not even close. They jump to insane conclusions, and their whole plan doesn't make any sense at all. Victor being dumb and crazy I can kinda buy. Dude's literally got nemesis worms in his brain. But what's Zeno's excuse? This is one of the reasons the plot doesn't quite hold up as well on a second playthrough. Before you have all the information, you're just assuming that stuff like this is gonna eventually make sense. The way the information is revealed, it's unlikely you'll realize just how dumb most of the stuff is until the very end. It doesn't ruin the experience, but it does prevent it from feeling truly special. Requiem is a more or less successful version of the ¿por qué no los dos idea that Resident Evil 6 had. There's two opposing yet equally compelling genres that this series is known for at this point, and this game proves that doing both in the same game is definitely possible. It's really cool to go through as Leon and rip and tear through the same enemies that were genuinely threatening as Grace. That kind of recontextualization is neat, and I think a follow-up game would do well to continue to explore that. There was some worry that switching back and forth would cause some weird pacing or otherwise damage the experience, but I think it actually ends up improving the pacing because the changeovers are spaced out so perfectly. Each perspective shift is a nice break and adds a lot of variety to the gameplay. Not to mention that it goes a long way to highlight the differences in personality and capability between the two characters. They quite literally aren't even playing the same game. Despite being the standard 8 to 10 hours long, it feels closer to two 4 to 5 hour long games that admittedly do feel pretty dense in terms of cool moments as you're rushed from set piece to set piece, but both are also relatively light on depth or substance. For what it's worth though, I do think that's more true of Leon's half and slightly less true of Grace's. Both still very enjoyable, especially on a first playthrough. Follow-up playthroughs give a lot more opportunity to scrutinize the plot and the gameplay systems, and the game definitely doesn't continue to impress at that point. Although it is commendable that there's a handful of new surprises on the insanity difficulty, like the bulldozer fight requiring an extra step, enemies attacking you during the sniping part, and various little things like that. I would even go as far to say that Requiem's biggest success is the pacing. There's some small problems with the gameplay, and the plot doesn't always really check out, but the pacing is damn near perfect on a first playthrough. In a world where so many games are way too fucking long and frequently overstay their welcome, I am more than happy to finally play a game that constantly switches it up and just leaves me wanting a little bit more. It really is the better half of two good games.